Hey folks, as usual, I have been keeping my eye out for new releases from indie presses, and I have a list here to share with you of books that are coming out on March 14th and March 15th. And if you stick to the end, I have a few books here that I've been reading recently that I thought I'd share. Coming out from Noemi Press on, I think March 15th, is a novel called Assia by the poet Sandra Simmons. And the novel is loosely based on the life of Assia Wevel, who was the mistress of Ted Hughes, and it was actually their affair that broke up the marriage of Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. And 6 years after Plath's suicide, Assia Wevel actually also committed suicide, killing her 4-year-old daughter in the process as well. She was reportedly really haunted by the memory of Sylvia Plath and suffered obviously from deep depression, and she actually had lived in Germany, and she was Jewish, and she had fled the Nazis and escaped the Nazis, and so she had this just very traumatic, fascinating life. And this novel, it's described as like a non-linear look at her whole life. And on the website, it says that the novel asks us to hold our judgment and consider the personal and political histories of people who commit unthinkable acts. Also from Noemi Press is a poetry collection called A Record of How the Mother's Textile Became Sound by Noel Nader French. And this is one of those poetry collections that seems impossible to describe, not having read it, but it has some key words that always catch my eye in the description. It says it is a poetry collection that considers motherhood and daughterhood, and also grief and memory. It's about language and text, and the ability of language and text to transform and to resurrect, like to resurrect a memory, to resurrect a loved one, but also the impossibility of language and text to transform and resurrect. From the New Press, there is a memoir called The Brass Notebook, a memoir of feminism and freedom by Devaki Jain. And Devaki Jain is an influential Indian economist and feminist. And she, based on the description of this book, has led an extraordinary life. Apparently, decades ago, she befriended the author Doris Lessing, the author of The Golden Notebook. And Lessing at the time encouraged Jain to write her own story. And here it is. This memoir here is The Brass Notebook, and it takes readers like all across the globe as the author is kind of combating conventions that are expected of her and trying to live her own life, but also fighting for the rights of women around the globe, and especially focusing on the issue of poverty and women in poverty. And it has a foreword by Amartya Sen and an introduction by Gloria Steinem. So it comes well endorsed. From Grove Atlantic, there's a book called How to Think Like a Woman by Reagan Penaluna. And this is nonfiction. This book caught my eye because it's about something that I've been thinking a little bit about recently. So this is a portrait of the author's life in academics, specifically in philosophy. Then it's also the portrait of 4 women philosophers throughout history. And it caught my eye because I was recently watching a YouTube video from a YouTuber who has a PhD in philosophy and talks a lot about how to get into philosophy as a beginner. And this particular video was how to read philosophy, as a beginner, how to read philosophy. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'd be interested in that. So I clicked on it and I started watching it. And one of the first tips, the first tip was find a distraction-free space. I started laughing. I literally started laughing. As a mother, with a young kid in a tiny urban space, there is no such thing as a distraction-free space. And it just made me, and I'm not saying that tip was wrong, but it just made me think about how just the field of philosophy and so many other fields, just at the get-go, exclude an entire segment of the population and say, well, you don't have a distraction-free space, then you cannot read philosophy. And for all sorts of reasons, there are all sorts of reasons that someone might not have a distraction-free space. It just got me thinking a lot about philosophy and the academic world and motherhood and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a long wind up to why when I saw this book, it kind of jumped out at me and it caught my eye. Again, this is the author's journey studying philosophy and then working in the field of philosophy in an academic setting and encountering sexism in that world, kind of the sexism embedded in the field itself. And then she also weaves in these histories of these 4 female philosophers. So then the 4 women that she discusses are Damaris Cudworth Masham, Mary Astle, Catherine Cockburn, and Mary Wollstonecraft. And from the MIT Press, we have Sentience, The Invention of Consciousness by Nicholas Humphrey. Consciousness is a topic that fascinates me in general. So again, this is one that jumped out at me. I have no idea if this is a book that I would actually understand, especially given my aforementioned lack of a distraction-free space, and because this is described as both a philosophical and scientific study. But this book explores the evolutionary history of consciousness and talks about the difference between consciousness and sentience and kind of, how sentience appears in animals other than humans and whether or not sentience and consciousness were basically accidents of evolution that are confined to Earth. So a description from the website that I really liked. The goal is to solve the hard problem, to explain the wondrous, eerie effect of phenomenal consciousness. The redness of a poppy, the sweetness of honey, the pain of a bee sting. What does this magical dimension of experience amount to? What is it for, and why has it evolved? So sticking with that same theme, from Norton, we have Planta Sapiens, The New Science of Plant Intelligence by Paco Calvo. If I would suggest any book pairing, it would perhaps be the previous one with this book, because this book explores the question of whether plants are sentient, and the author gives numerous examples from studies of plant behavior, and also explores the philosophical and scientific history of the debate over what actually even is intelligence. It also might be an interesting pairing with Braiding Sweetgrass, which focuses on plants as teachers. So it might be really interesting to read this book right alongside Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, because this author apparently argues that plants are neither objects nor resources. They are agents in themselves and for themselves. And that's a point that Kimmerer really drives home in Braiding Sweetgrass as well, that plants are not just resources, they're beings, they are other beings that we share this earth with. We're going right along with this kind of plant, animal, nature, earth theme here, because next up we have from Coffee House Press, The Nature Book, a novel by Tom Comita. And this is a novel, but it's a novel comprised entirely of excerpts from other works of fiction, and specifically these are excerpts that are describing as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, the more than human world. So they're descriptions of mountains and rivers and plants and animals and forests, and they are all notably missing humans within those descriptions. And so these excerpts are all arranged to create a novel that is, as described on the website, post-human. So the author takes elements of other works of fiction that are usually, elements that are usually found in fiction but are pushed to the background. They're used as setting, and they bring them to the foreground and construct the entire novel out of what is usually in the background of most novels. And it creates kind of an anthology or a archive or a collage of all of this different writing in a way that challenges the usually human-centric way that novels usually work. I would say most novels are centered around humans. So it really challenges the way that we usually center humans within a novel, but then also the way that we as a species project ourselves onto the like more than human world. Then from $2 Radio by Robert Lopez is a book of nonfiction called Dispatches from Puerto Nowhere, an American story of assimilation and erasure. So this book is really structured as short dispatches, and each section is titled like dispatch from. So there's dispatch from 1970s Long Island, dispatch from the moon, dispatch from the Caribbean, dispatch from one way of looking at it. And the dispatches all come together to form a portrait of the author's life and the author's family, going back to Lopez's grandfather, who was born in Puerto Rico and immigrated to the US in the 1920s. And the book is all about the family's efforts to assimilate to their new homeland. And it's about the author's efforts to like reclaim that family history. And as Lopez writes, he says, "I'm still grappling with what I've lost and how I can miss something I've never had." From New York Review of Books is Rombo by Esther Kinsky, and it's translated by Caroline Schmidt. And this is a novel about two severe earthquakes that occurred in 1976 in the northeast region of Italy. And the earthquakes killed about 1,000 people and left another 10,000 without any shelter. And it's a non-linear narrative told from the point of view of 7 men and women who were children at the time of the earthquake. And they give their recollection and experience of the aftermath of the earthquake, but it sounds like it's also a lot about memory and kind of comparing the unstable ground of memory to the earthquakes themselves. And it's supposed to have a very detailed and rich and extensive description of the region, like its history and the landscape and the culture, that is kind of weaved in with this, the narratives from these 7 survivors. From Deep Vellum is a novel called Lookout by Christine Bile. And this is a novel that is set in rural Montana, and it's a family drama, a family story that spans 4 decades and mostly focuses on a father and a daughter. And it's described as like a dual coming of age story. So coming of age of both the young daughter and the father, as they both detail with these really nuanced cultural forces that, cultural and natural forces that shape the land and the region that they live on. And it's described as deeply felt and unconventionally told. From Catapult is Brother and Sister Enter the Forest by Richard Mirabella. And this is a dual timeline story. It opens like a fairy tale and ends like a nightmare. This cannonball of a queer coming-of-age novel follows a young man's relationship with a violent older boyfriend, and now he and his sister survive a terrible crime. So the novel is weaving together these 2 timelines. We see Justin, the young boy who's in high school, and his relationship with his older boyfriend, and then we see Justin as an adult arriving on his sister Willa's doorstep with nowhere to live, and he kind of completely disrupts her like very ordered life. Something dramatic happens that they kind of like have to figure out together. From Saraband Books by Will Weitzel is a story collection called Nights from This Galaxy. Again, these are short stories that are supposed to be very dark and haunting and tell very grim tales of apex predators, so both humans and other predators. So there are stories of humans encountering wolves and lions and sharks and snakes, and it's supposedly not for the faint of heart. Recently, I have been working my way through the full long list for the inaugural Republic of Consciousness Prize in the US and Canada. The prize has been around for several years in the UK, but this is the first year they're awarding it to publishers in the US and Canada. And I have a full video talking about the prize and the long list, but basically this is a prize that is completely dedicated to small publishers. I think the publisher has to publish 18 or fewer books within a year, and this prize focuses on fiction, so the publisher needs to primarily focus on fiction as well, and all of the books nominated need to be works of fiction. And I am working my way through the full long list. I am still waiting on one, The Sleeping Car Porter, from my library, but here are the other 9. I finished 5. I'm gonna do a full reaction video and go more in depth into each of these 10 books, but I would recommend any of these to anyone. So there's New Animal by Ella Baxter. This is published by $2 Radio. There is Family Album Stories by Gabriela Alemán, and this is published by City Lights Books. This is Moldy Strawberries. These are stories by Caio Fernando Abreu, and this is from Arc of Heligo Books. And then probably my 2 favorites so far, these were all amazing, but these are my 2 favorites so far, is Pollak's Arm by Hans van Trotha, and this is from New Vessel Press. This is a novel, and it is amazing. And then also God's Children Are Little Broken Things by Irinse Ifakandu, and this is from A Public Space Books, and these stories are some of the best character-driven, beautiful short stories I've read in a really long time. They're gorgeous. I have started Get 'Em Young, Treat 'Em Tough, Tell 'Em Nothing from Robin McLean, and this is from And Other Stories, and these are short stories and they're really wacky and great. And then I'm also in the middle of reading, or I just started actually, New and Selected Stories by Cristina Rivera Garza, and this is published by Dorothy, and this one I've kind of been saving because I've been really looking forward to reading her work. I've heard so much about it, and even just the introduction was brilliant. One that I have heard is a little bit gory and features lots of bodily fluids, so I've been waiting for the right moment to pick it up, is Blood Red by Gabriela Ponce, and this is from Restless Books, but I'm really looking forward to this as well. And then one I'm a little on the fence about what I'm going to do is A New Name by Jan Fosse. This is from Transit Books, and this is the 3rd book of his septology, and I know that you can technically read them out of order, but I am deciding whether or not I actually want to do that. And then the one I'm waiting on from my library is The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Meyer from Coach House Books. I just finished The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, and this is part of my project to read through the library of books I have from New Directions, and I think this was Helen DeWitt's debut novel, which is kind of crazy to think about. It's huge and it's brilliant. I'm not going to fully describe it here because I think I want to go a little more in depth because I have a lot of thoughts about it, but basically it's the story of single mother Sibylla and her young son Ludo. And in the beginning, we have mostly Sibylla's perspective as she's dealing with this 4-year-old Ludo who is a genius and is like begging her to learn ancient Greek and like many other languages and all sorts of other stuff. That was incredible. And then the second half of the book is told from Ludo's perspective when he's like 11, and he is trying to desperately to figure out who his father is. And so it's about him going off on all of these adventures trying to figure out who his father is, and it is very interesting. It's got all sorts of, it's got like actual like Greek and like translations and math problems and all sorts of, just the structure is very interesting. Really fascinating book. I also just finished a brandly new released book from $2 Radio called The Red-Headed Pilgrim, and this is by Kevin Maloney. And this book by Kevin Maloney is about a main character named Kevin Maloney, and we basically follow Kevin Maloney through many existential crises throughout his entire life. So we see him as a kid and a teenager and a guy in his 20s trying desperately to lose his virginity, and as a father in his 30s, and then having an existential crisis in his 40s, and he's kind of trying to live this jobless, almost on the road, beatnik life, and actually there's a ton of references to the Beats throughout the whole novel, but it doesn't really go quite how he hoped it would go, and it is laugh out loud funny. I mean, this book is so funny, but it's also really sad in parts, and especially the sections on parenting, those were actually kind of hard for me to read. Overall, very, very funny. The main character, Kevin Maloney, has this just like childlike and really open-hearted view of the world. He doesn't want to have a job, so he tries desperately. He drops out of college. He tries desperately not to have a job, but then, he has to like feed himself and his family, so he ends up in various jobs. But I thought I'd just like read maybe the first part, just so you can get like a sense of the tone of this very funny book. He's talking about how he had this like completely normal childhood, and like why did he not turn out normal? His life was as normal as you can get. And he says, as a child in Beaverton, Oregon, a suburb of Portland, the way the monkeys are a suburb of the Beatles, I was raised in front of the television, eating McDonald's every day, mainlining high fructose corn syrup, confused whether my real family was Mom, Dad, and my brother Pete, or Mr. Belvedere, Alf, and the Golden Girls. I was constantly stimulated. I had all of my vaccination shots. Whenever I felt a vague desire for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, somebody made me one. I should have turned out normal, but I didn't. What happened? And then later on, he says, I accepted the world without question. My parents said, there is a magical rabbit who brings chocolate on Easter, a holiday marking the day our dead God crawled out of his grave. And I said, that makes sense. I just opened to this one part that like also made me laugh. I came to a decision. If I didn't have sex by my 22nd birthday, I'd have my penis and testicles surgically removed so I could enjoy the beauty of the sky and trees and rivers without hating myself because of my inability to find a woman to have sex with, because I spent my Friday and Saturday nights reading the Bhagavad Gita at the public library. And then it skips ahead in time and the first sentence of the next chapter starts. It was December 14th, 10 days before my penis amputation. If any of these books sounded good to you, I hope you'll hit the like button. That will hopefully help these books spread across the internet and hopefully make their way into the hands of readers who will love them. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.
I'm back, and guess what? The day I filmed the March 14th release video, I got this in the mail. It's The Nature Book by Tom Comita. I had forgotten that I subscribed to Coffee House Press and that I would probably be getting this book in the mail, so yay! Okay, bye!